Good morning. This is Tim Selden from the Montessori Foundation down in sunny Sarasota, Florida. And with me today is Dane Peters, who is a independent Montessori school consultant and a longtime head of school up in the New York, New England area, right, Dane?
Yes,
You're a current member of the American Montessori Society Board, and you often give presentations on various aspects of independent school leadership. And I think today you're going to talk about boards and good board governance, right?
yes, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Tell us a little bit about your background, Dane.
I was born and raised in public education, very traditional. And when I got out of the military, I was looking to find a teaching job and came across a private school that took me on. And so there I spent the next roughly 30 years in traditional education. And when I turned 54, I got to head a school in Brooklyn, New York, and it was a Montessori school, which I knew nothing about.
It was Brooklyn Heights,
And
right?
right, Brooklyn Heights Montessori in Brooklyn, New York, and I just fell head over heels with Montessori education, and see it now as the way to educate children. And I'm now looking at helping my son and daughter-in-law raise their two granddaughters through a Montessori lens, and they attend a Montessori school. But one of the things that has been a passion of mine is governance. And I've sat on over 12 nonprofit boards, three of them as president of the board and two of them as head of school, and just have fallen in love with that and see a relationship between good governance and our Montessori schools. That is a passion of mine right now.
It would be interesting to find out a little bit about how many of the people who are currently online are working with a school that is not for profit and has a board of trustees. I know certainly some people, many of whom tend to gravitate to the Montessori Foundation, may be individual entrepreneurs. And we celebrate the private entrepreneurial approach to independent school education as well as a nonprofit. So to give Jack a sense of, to give Dane a sense of who's there, I want to remind everyone that you're muted, and the way to communicate is through the questions panel. So if you would, check in with us and just type whether you have a nonprofit board or not. And of course, you can ask Dane or me questions that way. So this is your chance. Log in. Tell us what you think. What's your experience? Aaron says, here I am, it's me. Jack says, thanks for inviting us. But Aaron, do you have a nonprofit board? And Jack, do you have a nonprofit board? And how about the rest of you? Just tell us a little bit about what you got. All right, now it comes in. So at Pines Montessori, she has a not-for-profit board. This is Patty Subelman. And Aaron Oliver is from Salida Montessori Charter School. They, of course, have a non-profit board. Jack says it's too early for me. He's in Beijing, and he's just getting started. And he says he doesn't have either a nonprofit or a for-profit. Let's see, Margaret Whitley says, I have a board of governors for the last 5 years after I converted 42 years into the life of the school. That's the Montessori Academy of London, Ontario, old friends of ours, and I suspect of yours too, Dane. Like her, I started off running the Barry School as a proprietary school, and in 1984 made the decision to convert to a what I would call a closely held board made up of community leaders and friends of the school, with only one or two token past parents on the board to give some balance, and then one or two ex officio parent and teachers on the board to give their perspective. There are lots of ways to do this. So Dane, tell us about your thoughts.
Well, let me jump right into the presentation, and I'll go through relatively quickly. And Tim, I'll let you stop me at any point if there are some questions that come up. But one of the things I have become sensitive to is the fact that many of our Montessori schools are for-profit. And so I like to think that while we're talking about nonprofit governance, a lot of the things that apply to a nonprofit board can apply to an owner-head relationship and how schools are run. But nevertheless, let me move along to talk about good board governance in our schools. And one of the things I like to just remind our listeners is to compile a to-do list, because often when these are done, you walk away and it just goes into the ether world. But sometimes when you get to write them down, it can be helpful. And I am happy, Tim, if there is an avenue for it, happy to share this presentation as a PDF, though I know it will be online, which is nice.
Absolutely. Many people do. And by the way we structure it is at montessori.org/webinars, and also in the IMC International Montessori Council Members Library. I will typically embed the PDF as an attachment along with the link to the file. Thank you, Dane. If you'll send that to me afterwards, we'll share that with everyone.
Will do. One of the things that I think is important is whether we're nonprofit or for-profit, it's about developing the culture of our school and going with it. So, you know, you might call a person a director or an owner, and I say trustees. Some people talk about policies in the same breath as they talk about bylaws, or a governance committee, and I say committee on trustees, or like on the AMS board, I'm the chair of the directorship committee. These are all the same. Some people call criteria things that have to be is a form of measuring for accreditation, and some organizations call them standards, and I say head teacher, and some people say directress in the Montessori world. So no matter how you couch any of the terminology, whether you're talking about education or we're talking about governance, it's important to discern what people mean when they say a particular thing, and don't hesitate to ask those questions. I do it all the time. I sit on another board right now. I sit on a local repertory theater board, and very, very similar structure, very similar issues that happen on school boards. So our agenda is going to take 4 paths: infrastructure with standards, board basics, annual uninterrupted work cycle, and resources. So we'll jump into infrastructure with standards. So who's to say what is right and what is wrong as far as the way a school is run, be it a board or be it the operations of a school? And one of the things that I default to all the time is research and data, resources, related professional organizations and networks, and standards, or the criteria that is used in accreditation. So we have 2 kinds of standards. One of the standards is internal standards, which are bylaws, policies, procedures, evaluations, committee on trustees. Those are things that we check ourselves by on a regular basis, or we should. And then there are external standards: annual financial audit, principles of good practice, professional organizations, accreditations. I sit on, and I still do, even though I'm working retired, I sit on as chair of visiting committees for accreditation process. It keeps me on the ball, and it also keeps me in touch with the criteria and the standards of the organization that I'm working with. The purpose of accreditation, a good friend of mine, Dr. Judith Sheridan, who's the Associate Director for Accreditation at the New York State Association of Independent Schools, puts this down very simply, what the purpose of accreditation is. It's verification, what it is; credibility, We are what we say we are: compliance, good governance, and safety. Safety is important. Core values, tradition and history, what was, celebration of achievements, and what has been accomplished. And then you also are looking, and it should trigger, the accreditation should trigger the vision of what could be, and aspirations, what we want to be, in strategic initiatives and design thinking. Also, ISM, which is a good organization, it's based in Wilmington, Delaware, and it's a for-profit organization, but it supports schools throughout the United States, actually throughout the world, and they have 6 stability markers which talk about schools, the stability of schools, and they are cash reserve, debt endowment mix, and number 2 is strategic plan. All good schools have a strategic plan or a strategic financial plan. Has good executive leadership, be it the board chair, well, actually it's the head of school or the CEO of an organization. 4, that it's hard income driven, that there's money that's coming in, namely tuitions, that are accountable. And then you have a profile board. So a board that you don't just at the supermarket bump into a friend, you happen to be on a board, and the friend says, hey, aren't you on the Montessori school board? And you say, yes. Gee, I'd love to be on it. And, oh, great, we're always looking for people, and that person comes on. One of the mistakes that many of our nonprofit boards make is that they don't profile their board. Look at what they have, and then go after what they need to fill in the gaps, be it financial, be it legal, be it academic outside perspective. So having a profile board is important. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then also board leadership is a stability marker, having good board leadership, and also having a succession plan for not only the board leadership positions, but also the committee chairs. Now on to board basics. There are certain things that are basics in all good nonprofit boards. And these basics come from research and data, resources, related professional organizations and networks, and standards. And so American Montessori Society is one organization that can give you that kind of information. Also, Montessori Foundation can help in that respect. Also, one that I rely a lot on is the NAIS, heads and boards working in partnership. And NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools. If you get a chance, and if you've not been introduced to NAIS, go to their website and noodle around and see what's going on. But they have some really good research and data. So some of the standards, let me share with you. So there are, from NAIS, they talk about top issues in our school. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that which is shaded in green is what the heads of schools say are the top issues, and the orange is what board chairs are saying are the top issues. So, for example, one of the top issues 58% of the heads say and 48% of the board chairs say is that marketing, branding the school, showing the value added of an independent school education. Developing a sound 5-year financial plan. See how that overlaps with the ISM stability marker. Very important. Recruiting, retaining, and compensating quality faculty, a top issue in our schools today. Identifying effective sources of non-tuition revenue. Do you have a summer camp? Do you have after-school childcare and before-school childcare that generates revenue? Do you rent your facilities to outside organizations? All of those kinds of non-tuition revenue can be very important. Another one is creating a 21st century program and curriculum. Another top issue is managing enrollment and keeping the school affordable. Big issue. And that I think, for me, this is probably one of the top issues and one of the issues that brings about the most anxiety between a board and the CEO or the head of school, just because enrollment fluctuates so dramatically. And increasing availability of financial aid is also another top issue in our schools. So there are three types of board. Ram Charan wrote the book Boards That Deliver, and I come across this constantly when I'm consulting with boards, and I see it, and boards that I consult with are in one of three types. They fall in one of three types of boards. The first type is called a ceremonial board, a board that is there that has a long time founding strong head of school, and essentially the board does whatever that head of school says. Or it could be in a different way. You have a board chair who's been around for a long time, and essentially everybody just falls in line and does what that board chair says. Might be a big benefactor of the school, and so people don't question it. School's been running successfully, and then all of a sudden, when one of those people leaves, whether it's a long-standing head or a board chair, what happens is it becomes a liberated board, and everything is sort of up for grabs, looking for any kind of leadership. And this often happens when a good succession plan is not in place. Boards become liberated, and in many respects that's a good term, but at the same time it's, you're looking for who's in charge, and there's a vacuum that forms, and it might be the most senior faculty member who step up and they say, no, we can't do it that way, or the new head is trying to set his or her position within the community, or it might be the parents who are pushing and pulling and tugging, or it might be the trustees. Once that all comes together, and back to that stability marker about strong executive leadership and strong board leadership, once that takes over and both the executive and the board president are in sync, all of a sudden those things can fall into place, and you have what is called a progressive board. A board that ascribes to good board governance, good board basics, and knows how to distinguish between governance and operation. To give you just a little glimpse of, this is from an NAIS survey, board composition, if you notice in the green there in 2012, the composition of a board, typically an independent day school, and don't forget, many of our Montessori schools are independent schools, but just because they aren't an independent school or belong to a state or regional association or the NAIS, they're essentially, many of them are the same. But you see, under the total in 2012, basically boards had about 18 people on the board. Half of those people were current parents or are current parents. And 3 to 4 of those parents are past parents. And then grandparents come in there, alumni, faculty, little bit. And generally, from NAIS standards, they discourage faculty from sitting on boards, nonprofit boards. None have students, and generally on these boards, one is an external community representative. One that I liked and I recommend is, if it's possible, if on our Montessori boards, if a head of another school, a non-competing school, can sit on your board. They can bring so much perspective and so much credibility and gravitas especially during board discussions. I was fortunate to have heads of school from other schools sit on my board, one at a time, but very, very helpful. I found that very helpful.
A couple of quick things that I just want to jump in here on. The first is Dane started by talking about the value of accreditation. I want to echo that. I think all accreditations really lead to a reflection and the development of many of the strategic organizational and strategic financial plans that are so vital. And they cause you to look at yourself. You mentioned AMS. There's also, of course, in the Montessori world, The Association Montessori International has a version. Theirs is not as much a self-study as the model of Are You One of Us? And it does definitely work for the schools that are part of that. The International Montessori Council is the third major organization that does it, and we were organized to be an independent Montessori accreditation. I'd say that today AMS and the IMC models are much more similar than when they originally started. And so we're just another alternative. The IMC is affiliated with the Montessori Foundation, so a lot of people get confused about that. It's because people wanted to belong to the foundation, and we were asked to start a independent and highly affordable Montessori path to accreditation, and that's when we formed the IMC. The other thing that I would want to add in is that we generally recommend in Montessori schools that you really change the balance. Dane, if you go back to the slide that shows the NACE, National Association of Independent Schools survey of board membership, we would recommend in the typical Montessori school, you remember that we face a challenge that a lot of independent schools don't face. We have a highly controversial or non-traditional approach to education. We are normally very focused, much more focused on early childhood education than a lot of independent schools are. We have a lot of competitive pressures on our families to leave us and go to other independent schools or to public schools. And it tends to be a challenge to keep the program authentically Montessori. One of the ways that we find that Montessori schools get into trouble is they have a lot of present parents on the board and they have big boards. Dane, I'm sure, is going to talk about the issue of how long a trustee should stay on a board. We would urge the longer the better within reason, because you need a sense of history. You don't need an ever-changing board. And you certainly don't want a parent-elected board. You don't need a popularity contest. This idea of a highly thoughtful, differentiated board, as Dane was talking about, I think is vital for Montessori schools. I think we're saying the same thing. I would just say I find having Montessori teacher educators or heads of schools even better be a significant part of the board is highly desirable, as long as they're not people from the same town who are looking to maybe unseat the current head of school and take over the position or absorb the school into their school as part of a chain. But you'll usually get a tremendous value out of Montessori educators, so having more than one works well. And I find if you're going to have any present parents, you need the true believers, the people that have been there for years, really have a deference to the Montessori experts, or have enough knowledge of what fully implemented Montessori is, that they're not going to attempt to redefine it every couple of years. Because what we're seeing is more and more modified Montessori, which frankly, from our experience, leads to one of two things. In some markets, it leads to an increase in enrollment because you look less Montessori and you look more like what the market wants. But the schools are scattered, they become prep schools, and the Montessori-ness really begins to evaporate. Or you get a school that is internally divided between faculty and heads of schools that may or may not be Montessori oriented. A lot of schools turn to Carney Sando for leadership when a head needs to be replaced. A lot of people come into schools with no orientation of Montessori at all, and they can do a great job. Dane would be a great example of that. If you approach it from the point of view of holding a school in trust instead of redefining it according to the whims of what you think the market is calling for today or what the parents you're talking to want, there's a sense of enduring values and principles of operation are what should, in our experience, really define a Montessori school. So in general, we suggest smaller boards and certainly more Montessori leaders on the board from outside the school. Back to you, Dane.
Thanks for those. So for bringing up those resources within the Montessori community, that's very helpful. One of the things that I would harken back to are those stability markers from ISM, and those schools that have more current parents on them, so long as there is strong executive leadership and strong board leadership, generally it can stay as a progressive board as opposed to it being liberated and diluting. And I hear what you're saying, and I think it's a good point, Tim. We don't want that Montessori infrastructure to be diluted in any way. And it can be very precarious if people who are the leaders of the school just allow that to happen just to satisfy or to get to where enrollment needs to be in order to balance the budget. In terms of board size, ISM, and understand I am not a representative of ISM, nor am I a representative of BoardSource or NAIS. These are just resources that I use, have been using, and have been very helpful. ISM puts out a publication called Ideas and Perspectives, and one of the articles is called Right Sizing Your Board. Notice, how big should your board be? And it comes from their perspective. In the board basics, generally, I like to think of our school communities as a triangle. So you have faculty and staff on one face of the triangle, you have parents on the other, and the base of the triangle would be trustees. And of course, we know who's in the middle, or should be in the middle, and that is the children. Now, probably the foremost expert on nonprofit boards, not just schools, but nonprofit boards, is Dr. Richard Chait. And his book on governance, called Governance as Leadership, is like the Bible for nonprofit boards. And I'm not suggesting, it's a good book to have, and I'm not suggesting that you go out and read it from cover to back, because it is a little bit dense, but at the same time, I have continued to use it in my work and guidance. One of the things that is pretty seminal that Chait talks about are three types of boards. One is type 1, which is a fiduciary board, a responsibility that all boards have, and it's about making sure that the board is taking care of its assets, not just what's in the bank, not just the budgets, but also its faculty and staff, its resources, its plant resources, physical plant resources. The other type of board is called a strategic board. And this is a type board that's not looking after the school for today, which the fiduciary board does, if you will, but it's looking out for the school beyond today. In other words, what we're heading into, whether it's the economy that's causing the fluctuations in enrollment or the shortage in teachers. But boards must be strategic, and part of that strategy comes in looking to the future and putting together strategic plans and strategic financial plans. Then the third type of board is called a generative board. These are boards that think outside the box. They go beyond tomorrow. They go beyond what the strategic plan is saying. And they start asking questions about, since teachers have always been an issue and our teachers have to travel 1,500 miles to go to a teacher education program, why don't we think about having a teacher education program? This is just an example about generative thinking. And boards, generally, the best boards will have all three types of people and systems in place to help them run. I would ask you, and normally when I present this in person, I ask people what 2 requirements for a successful school might be. And one of my all-time favorite authors is a guy by the name of Patrick Lencioni, and he has a whole host of books on basically corporate structure and management but they apply very, very closely to nonprofit world. And the most recent book that he wrote, called The Advantage, he talks about the two requirements for success is that the organization must be smart. In other words, thinking strategically and having systems in place for good marketing, finance, and technology. But he also says that organizations need to be healthy. Minimal politics, minimal confusion, high morale, high productivity, low turnover. And the question that I would pose to you, and tell me, Tim, if we can do this, asking our listeners, which one, if you had to choose, either being a smart organization or a healthy organization, which one would you choose, to be smart or to be healthy? Can we ask that, or does that take up too much time?
Doesn't take much time. I'm going to create a poll. Let's see. I'll take just a second, create a new poll. And we'll say, which type of board would you like? And let me just, one answer, multiple choice, one answer, okay. There's a question, now I have to put in the answer. Now the easiest way to do this is just ask people to type it. Guys, if you would just type in your thoughts, would you rather have a smart board or a healthy board, healthy organization? Well, while people are doing that, Margaret Wheatley is up in London, Ontario, asked me to remind everyone that in Canada, there is another accrediting body that is for Canadian Montessori schools. It's called the Canadian Council of Montessori Administrators. They have currently accredited about 100 Montessori schools, most of which are Ontario, but increasingly they are getting applications and accrediting Montessori schools outside of Ontario. So what I see in Ontario is indeed consistent with Margaret's sense. There is a strong accrediting body there. There are AMI schools, there are AMS schools, there are IMC schools, but CCMA certainly is a major group serving Canada. On the other hand, guys, you're supposed to be responding. Which of these requirements for success do you like? Tell us what you think, because we want to see what you think. I'm seeing healthy. Martin says, a terrible question. Healthy would lead to smart. Healthy because hopefully would also lead to smart. And Patty says she wants a smart board. And then I see healthy. Okay.
Well, then our listeners are pretty astute, because Lencioni says that if you are a healthy board, you can become a smart board. But generally, if you are a smart board and you're not healthy, it's very difficult to become healthy. And one of the other references I like to talk about is a book called Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. And Danny Meyer is probably the foremost biggest restaurateur in New York City. And he has a number of restaurants, very successful restaurants. And essentially, he ascribes to having healthy restaurants, and he's one of the biggest advocates for making sure that you take care of your employees, because if you take care of your employees, they will take care of the customers. And I see a direct correlation between what he talks about in his book and what we are as schools, making sure that we take care of our customers. Ultimately, it's the children, but it's their parents that make the decision as to whether they want to come back and order from your menu again. And part of that harkens back to what you talked about, Tim, is making sure that we have a strong Montessori environment and that it is not diluted in any way. Another aspect that I bump into quite often is this issue. The governing body delegates responsibility for the operations of the school to the head of school and ensures that the head of school receives appropriate support, evaluation, and compensation. This is one of the biggest issues that I bump into when I do visiting committees and look at schools through a microscope for the accreditation process. One of the biggest issues is governance, and then it's finance. It's not so much the program, it's not so much about the professional development or the fundraising. Sure, all those are important, but the issue that schools rail against and really struggle is the governing body taking care of governance and owning the school and letting the head take care of operations. And this trustee handbook is a book that I would buy for every oncoming new trustee. Excellent book.
Forgive me, I'm just going to jump in here for a second because I want to offer a contrarian perspective. I've used the NAIS Independent School Trustee Handbook for a long time, ever since it first began to be published. And it is certainly a marvelous resource, and I certainly understand where you're coming from, Dane. I do believe there is another model, and I think Montessori schools just need to be aware there is another model, because what typically happens with boards is they become the sort of isolated center of people who sit on a dais or have meetings late at night in a room, and they sort of think they know what the community is thinking, and they have all these committees. And usually the most important decisions are made when everyone is exhausted and falling asleep in their soup. There is another way that the Montessori Foundation teaches, which is designed to ensure that the school community is made up of people who really share common values, are rather passionately committed to the school, where the teachers really feel that they're being heard, that the parents feel they're being heard, where the students feel they're being heard, and where the board is more of a, instead of leading the ship necessarily, although sometimes they do, they're more working in partnership with the various stakeholders. One other thing about healthy schools is you really need, as Dane mentioned, a healthy faculty. One of the problems that we have in many schools is that people come in to these schools. They're often originally started as a nursery school, and somebody puts in the years of longevity, gets there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They may or may not know Montessori. They certainly hold a credential. There are a lot of people who hold credentials as Montessori educators who have wildly differing perspectives of what Montessori is and what it should be and what the nature of this particular school is. This goes into what Nace and Dane, you were saying about minimal politics. I think it's really important for boards and for heads of schools to understand another concept that we've explored in other webinars and will explore in future webinars. But it's basic to what we really emphasize at the foundation. That's the idea of clarity is the key to success. That clarity and community are not created by saying they exist or by someone squirreling away and writing a document. You have to periodically get the stakeholders to roll up their sleeve and ask, who are we? Why are we spending all this money to have our kids at this school? Or in the field of charter schools, which I know some of you run, charter schools are just like any other private school. It's just tuition's out of the picture. And you've got some different regulations. To succeed, you're competing with other charter schools and other public schools, as well as private schools. You have to have clarity there too. It's all the same idea of knowing who you are and driving the board's decisions and policies and strategic sense of its future, not only about the whims of the market today, but a sense of what is the mission of this entity and how do we keep faith with the legacy, which goes back to why do we call them trustees instead of directors. Board of Trustees, we hold this school in trust, which I think is a really key concept. Back to you, Dane.
Sure. It's also important to take this down a notch to the school itself And in the parent handbook, I would make sure and have this statement that you see on the screen now. That is it's very clarifying. That word is an important word, Tim. Things have to be clarified, but also the communication is very important. And it's the head who acts as the go-between between the parent body and the board. And it's a good idea to have the board chair to come once a year to talk at a parents association meeting, just to explain exactly what the board's role is in the school. And having this paragraph that I'm showing in the parent handbook, it becomes very clear, so that when someone starts crossing over that boundary or starts pushing against things, the structure of the school, you can refer them back to a written policy and a written document. But also is the statement right in red down below is, this has to be made clear to everyone, trustees as well as parents. The head of school is the chief executive officer of the school. The head is charged with implementing the school's strategic plan and overseeing the effective administration of all aspects of the school's operation. That has to be made very clear. Typical board structure, you have ad hoc committees which form as needed, and then you have standing committees that are there. They should be part of your bylaws. And if they aren't, you can easily amend those bylaws. Ad hoc committees are, let's say every 5 years, it's a good idea to review your mission statement. The board might form an ad hoc committee that is the task force on mission review. Brings together a group of people, they look at the mission, they reaffirm it, and then the board adopts the affirmation. Because that is one of the board's biggest responsibility, is caring for the mission of the school. Once that work is done in reviewing the mission, it goes away. That task force goes away. Same thing, you might, if you're going to do a strategic plan, you would have an ad hoc committee or a task force on the strategic planning process. Once that's done, it's done, it goes away. Ethics and confidentiality are big, amorphous kinds of issues that if you have them, you have a healthy organization, you have a healthy board. One of the things that I found in a set of bylaws in a school that I came across is board members shall make all decisions as an impartial member of the Board of Trustees, not as a parent or representative of any special group. Tim, you alluded to this, that there are parents with too many parents on the board. It can get confusing, and if they don't have, and if there isn't strong board leadership, they can transgress. And think about that math teacher that their child sits in his class and all of a sudden isn't doing well. Well, that parent is talking, that board member is talking at a board meeting about what are we going to do about Mr. So-and-so. And right then and there, with strong board leadership, it gets shut down. Also, an important aspect is anything that goes on in the board meeting must stay in that board meeting. And the ethics of good board meetings are so important, but that's not going to come from the head of school. It's got to come from the board chair. Now, getting back to Dr. Richard Chait in his book, Governance as Leadership, he says that there are basically 4 problems of board performance. Number one is rivalries. Rivalries between board members or rivalries between a board member and the head of school. That brings on issues, as you might expect. 2, board members being disengaged. Oh, I can't make tomorrow night's board meeting. I've got a business trip that just came up. And slowly but surely you find that people are saying, hey, where's Rita? Isn't she on the board? And they become disengaged, and it becomes very demoralizing for boards. Number 3, he talks about don't know what job is. One of the most important jobs of the trustee committee is to have a good board orientation. Right now on the AMS board, we are going through an inventory that we go through every year, asking board members to tell us what committees you're on. Do you like what you're doing? If you could change it, would you like to be on another committee? Or would you like to get off of a committee? Making sure that board members are engaged and know exactly what their job is very important. And those board members who are dissatisfied with their role. So if you take someone, bring them on the board because they gave a great gift to the school and you thought this person's going to be great on our development committee, you put them on that committee and they don't want to be there. That's the last place that they want to be. So it's important to do these annual surveys of your trustees to find out if they are engaged and they know what their job is and they are satisfied with their role. Bylaws and policies. Sometimes it's hard to tell the two apart, but here are some things to think about. The governing body is responsible for establishing school policies, and the administration is responsible for establishing administrative practices. Board creates a conflict of interest policy that is reviewed and signed by individual trustees annually. If this is not happening in your school on an annual basis, you need to make it happen. Board sets policy and focuses on long-range strategic issues. An individual trustee does not become involved directly in specific management, personnel, or curricular issues. Even though I mentioned this earlier, I want to bring up yet another source that is saying the same thing. Trustees take care to separate the interests of the school from the specific needs of a particular child or constituency. Bring it up again because this is an recurring problem in our schools today. And again, the conflict of interest. Oh, you know what? Beverly has that flower shop. I think if we ask her to just come in and do the gala, that would be great, and I'm sure she'll do it for free. Well, we have to be careful when we enter into those kinds of things, and they happen all the time. And you do want to be able to take advantage of the assets of our board members. But at the same time, it's important that it is made clear that if this presents a conflict of interest, then you don't want to go there. Come on. Trying to get to the next slide, but it's not behaving. Sorry about that. I think I don't know why this hasn't happened before. Well, then I'm going to, having done this so many times, I'm going to talk about the Committee on Trustees. And essentially, the Committee on Trustees is charged, and it's the most, for me, it's the most important committee beyond Finance, Executive, and Development Committee on a board. The Committee on Trustees is the most important because they are tasked with three charges. The first charge is the recruitment and nomination of board members. The old name of the Committee on Trustees used to be Nominating Committee. Well, it no longer. It should be Committee on Trustees because Committee on Trustees is not just taking care of the recruitment and nomination, but there are two other functions that they have. The one function that is significant is doing an annual board evaluation. And you evaluate the board, how you are performing on the board and also how the board is performing in general. There are instruments to help you do this, but the board must do this on an annual basis. And then the third charge of the Committee on Trustees is the ongoing professional development for the board. So having retreats, finding books, or having a library for good governance and school operations, using the Montessori Foundation for the resources that it offers, and say taking this webinar and then sharing it with the trustees. I so apologize for this. I don't know why this got stuck. Tim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, I was just making sure that Um, yeah, I can't even, I've lost
Dane,
control of my computer.
Dane, why don't you? I suspect what's happened is you're off of the window that controls it. Are you on a Mac or a PC?
A Mac.
Okay. What's happened is you clicked outside of the window, and while you can see it, it's not the active window. So is this a Keynote or a PowerPoint slideshow?
PowerPoint.
Okay. Look at the dock at the bottom of your screen. There you go. Okay. Find.
Here we go.
All right. And what you want to do now is just find the correct slideshow in the thing to the. Whoop, you lost it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just hit that arrow again.
but
Okay.
the
Now,
arrow isn't coming back to me,
well,
unfortunately.
click on that screen.
Yeah, but I've lost my arrow.
No, I see it. It's there.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it.
Huh. Interesting.
Huh.
Sorry, everyone.
Oh, sorry. Let me,
Sometimes
yeah,
what
I
you
apologize.
sometimes what you have to do is go to the Apple menu, pull it down, and do force quit. Start it again. I'm getting a number of people. If you're doing that, I'll. Jeannie is saying she can see it. So again, what I would do is I'd force PowerPoint to quit and just restart it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking it to do.
Mhm.
Because if I do Command Control Escape, it should do that.
Not anymore with
Wow,
the
this
new
is
not with the new operating system. That those keyboard don't work with the new one. So go under the Apple
well.
menu
Let me.
again.
Yeah, I won't. But I've got the spinning wheel,
Ah,
which
okay. Oh, the
it's the wheel of death.
spinning wheel of death.
Um,
Well, that's okay. We can just work with what we got. We got you.
yeah, and let me go to the next set of slides that would be coming up, and that would be to talk about um, the uninterrupted um, schedule, um, work schedule. And essentially, what a board should do is it looks at its mission, and then it also looks at its strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, out of it forms, you want to form an annual board agenda. And the annual board agenda essentially is looking at it. You map out, and this is done over the summertime, the executive committee with the committee chairs and the head of school. Essentially what you're doing is mapping out every meeting for the year so that you have just an overview of what is going to be accomplished. And you're looking at the strategic plan to guide you in helping you decide, okay, what are we going to try to accomplish this year? And to make it even more finite, what you're doing is you set up the head of school's goals and objectives based on the strategic plan. And those goals and objectives are agreed upon by the head and then adopted by the board so that when you go into the new year, you're all on the same page. So that someone can't say, a trustee can't say in February, hey, you know what, we haven't done a darn thing about, fixing the field, the soccer field. But wait a minute, that wasn't one of the goals and objectives for the head. And right now, the head is concentrating on fundraising, which is the most important issue that we need to think about right now, or enrollment. Once that is set up, then the head of school can be evaluated in the spring, the late spring, on how he or she is doing based on the goals and objectives, so that we're holding the head of school accountable for what he or she is supposed to be doing, and that he or she is very clear on what the board is looking for, so that when wedges are attempted to be driven between the head and the board by a parent, the board can stand strong and stand fast and say, no, this is our plan. So you have this uninterrupted work cycle that the board is following. And the board can also evaluate itself on these same goals and objectives that come from the strategic plan. So having that annual board agenda and then working through it with the goals and objectives for the head and then evaluating the head based on those goals and objectives is very important. One of the things I would add is that in September, it is good for the head to give a review of what took place last year, looking at the high points, some of the finances, the enrollment, maybe financial aid, number of teachers, staff that you had, and you do that within a 15-minute framework. Then what happens as you go through the course of the year, you have a basis on which to compare what's happening during the current year. And in the spring, the head gives a similar kind of a talk, no more than 15 minutes, and looks at his or her goals and objectives for that year and tells the board, this is how I'm doing or how I perceive that I'm doing. Is there any discussion? So you're now looking at the goals and objectives that have been set up for this current year. Along with that, I have another slide that talks about the 3 things that the board must be doing for the head. Must be setting those goals and objectives in a systematic way, in a thoughtful way, with the head every year before going into the new year. Then the board also has a good instrument for evaluating the head of school on a regular basis, must be on an annual basis. And then the last thing that the board must be doing is looking out ahead, setting up the contract for the contract between the head of school and the school or the board. So whether it's a 3-year contract, whether it's a 2-year renewable contract or a 5-year contract, this has to be done on a regular basis. Now, whether it's the finance committee or the executive committee, this can't be done the 2 weeks before the next board meeting when the contract should be fully negotiated. This should be an ongoing basis where the executive committee and the board, the head of school, are talking about this and working through this. The head needs to know that the board is looking after him or her, and whether it's benefits, compensation, professional development, asking the head of school, what's on your plate? I just gave at the AMS conference 2 weeks ago, I did a session on caring for the head of school. This is the board's only employee, and this is the board to talk about fiduciary requirements and fulfilling their fiduciary obligations. The board's biggest fiduciary obligation is to make sure that they are taking care of its head of school. Let me stop there. It's 11 o'clock, and again, I so apologize for this. I could shut the computer down and do a restart, but then we'd lose each other. Yeah. Tim?
Let's not do that. Let me just open up to people's questions and observations. Please, if there's anything before we end the day session that you want to share with Dane, by the way, Dane, just leave it up so it's background candy for what people are seeing. So be sure that something interesting is on your desktop. Anyway, tell me what you would like to say or ask of Dane. I'm looking for you to send in your notes under the questions. Again, Dane has suggested essentially what I've heard is a really good articulation of the conventional approach to good governance using the National Association of Independent Schools model for independent schools, and it works. One of the things I really appreciate about it is the idea of really building a board carefully, not just allowing people to say, gee, what do you got to do around here to get on the board? That causes a lot of trouble. History, having a sense of what the school is, having a real loyalty, unwillingness to let the school be damaged because you're angry or you're disengaged or you believe that the Montessori school should be more like a military school or some other kind of school. There are lots of people who will take a Montessori school and have it end up with Montessori at the younger kids level and a prep school at the top. Is that bad? Well, it depends on the way you look at it. One is the question of who does the board work for? I would argue that the board holds in trust the nonprofit. And the nonprofit was founded in a set of written documents. And there's also an oral history and a sort of cultural understanding of what was the nature of this school. Now, some schools, Montessori schools in particular, start off as daycare centers, as little Montessori half-day programs for moms and pops. And it may not be the way the school is 10 years later as it begins to grow up. But there's still the question of if you're using the name Montessori, what is that in your head? What do you mean by being a Montessori school? Because, boy, that can cover a lot of territory. Just do a search for Montessori in New York City, Connecticut, or New Jersey, and look at any random 50 schools, regardless of what organization they belong to. And you'll pretty quickly discover there's lots and lots of different types of schools, big ones, little ones, privately owned, nonprofit, parent co-ops where the parents elect the board. There are schools that are very college prep oriented. Sometimes that slides into weekly homework, weekly exams, quizzes, textbooks, grades. Other people would argue that Montessori doesn't do those kinds of things. In my opinion, you've got to, as a school, define what you mean by Montessori, because the word Montessori has become a commodity. Now, there is a resource for Montessori. What she wrote, said, and did is historically set down. We know pretty much what her positions were. However, like the Bible or any other religious faith, you can interpret it in different ways according to your perspective. Our basic argument is, one, Montessori ought to be the foundation of everything you do if you're calling it a Montessori, which in my opinion really calls into question a decision to have Montessori at one level and something else at another. That's called bipolar disorder, a schizophrenic school. I would argue that the things that define the school should be a lot bigger than we're an independent school that happens to use the Montessori approach. But again, there are no Montessori police. Success leads to a lot of things. Clarity is the biggest, and integrity, so that a parent knows what they're buying into and can receive it from level to level, from campus to campus, if you've got more than one campus, and from classroom to classroom, and from decade to decade. So that a parent who gives $1 million in year 20 comes back in year 30 and they don't discover the school has been transformed into something they hardly even recognize. So those are all things that I think are really important. Okay, Sean asks, any insights into the recruitment of board members? This is always a challenge for us. Cook them up in the chemistry lab. Sean is a doctor. She's in a small town. She has a small school, and that's a good question. Where do you find people?
That there is, if I could get to my computer, there is an excellent article that I found in a publication about just how to do that. And it is a difficult situation that you're talking about, Sean, because especially when you're in a small community, but reaching out, having your committee on trustees profiling its board, looking what you're setting up what you're looking for, and then going after and reaching out into the local community and inviting people to sit down and talk and letting them know what your school is all about and having that conversation, difficult as it may be. Now, I would also say, too, to be the contrarian, Tim, as you had said before, in my own experience in both schools that I ran, one a Montessori school and one non-Montessori school, I'd say probably 75% of my school was made up of current parents. And it was not an issue. It just was not an issue because the board was so strong and the board leadership is strong, and deferring to the head of school was very important because so many of our parents certainly are committed and they love Montessori. It's why they have their children in the school. You almost can't find a better person. At the same time, that orientation, the new trustee orientation, and the ongoing education of trustees is critical. Otherwise, if that doesn't happen, then you have the liberated board and the disaster, and it's no longer healthy. So you just have to get out there, beat the bushes, but do it in a systematic, orderly way.
I agree, and there's no question that in any school, the most likely person who is going to agree to serve on a board is a current parent. I think that the test that we all agree on is that what we're looking for is a parent who will do no harm, or a board member who will do no harm.
Good point.
Yeah, you're looking for people who really are committed. And as long as you've got that, I don't care who they are. If they're able to think beyond their own selfish interests, they can do a wonderful job. So hang on a sec. Let me get back to the questions that are coming in because we're getting lots of them. Patty says, I want to thank you, Dane, and I want to acknowledge your wonderful blog. I look forward to each and every posting. Jeannie Schultz says, Dane, this was a great presentation. Do you have a copy of the board survey that you talked about referencing with committee work, etc.?
I do have excerpts of it, and would be happy to, I don't know how to share it. Can I send it to you, Tim?
Absolutely. I'll share it out to everyone who's on the 970 some people that are on the list for this.
Okay, and I'll send you a PDF of the whole presentation, not just up to this page.
Absolutely. I think that, well, first of all, I definitely want to share the perspective that Jeannie and others have, which has been a great presentation, and looks to me like there's more stuff coming in. So clearly you have hit an interesting perspective with people. I'm going to switch this, by the way, so that what appears on the screen is my desktop, and I will just have it. I think that you're seeing my screen. Let's see what the next question is. Let's see. Nancy Chattel says, for new school having their first retreat and opening that September, what advice do you have, Dane, for what gets done besides the great idea about the jobs and goals for the head of school? I know I have my thoughts on that. Go ahead.
Part of the retreat is just bringing everyone together and doing a little bonding. I might recommend that you certainly have at least one meal together. So it might be lunch, and networking and getting to know one another, because so often our trustees come together at every meeting, and that's the only time they see each other. And we need to help them connect so that they are engaged. As Dick Chait talked about, the disengagement. But it is important to have a well spelled out agenda and it would be the Committee on Trustees who would form this, but in your case, probably they don't exist yet. So that would be your responsibility with the board chair's responsibility, because you want to make sure that the board chair is buying into this so that you both own it, whatever the agenda is going to be. You might do a little piece on looking at the bylaws, just going through them. As boring as that sounds, it's very critical. One of the issues that comes up often with schools going through accreditation is that their practices are not what the bylaws say. And it is so important. It's not that you can't change your practices, but then you must change your bylaws to conform to the practice. So I would say part of that retreat would be to look at bylaws. Part of that retreat might be to have, say, your lead teacher or head of the primary section or head of the lower L section might come in and just do 20 minutes of what's going on in the lower elementary program. You pick the program or you pick the topic, but it's nice to have some variety in the retreat. At the same time, it's also good to have your business manager or your financial person come in and just do a rough overview of the budget, how things are going on a year-to-date basis. And mentioning that, one of the things that I would say to everybody, if you don't already have a dashboard that's presented at every board meeting, come up with a dashboard. And there is a board source book that talks just about dashboards. But essentially, what a dashboard is, it's one piece of paper, and it shows your net worth, so any reserves that you have. It shows what the balance of all your your bank accounts are. It shows what your enrollment is last year at this time and what it is today. It shows the staff that you have and just numbers, and we're talking numbers. Looks at revenue, looks at expenses year to date, and gives an overview. So you might have a breakout session, or you might have a session just building a dashboard, your own dashboard, in terms of, okay, what are the things that you want to see on one piece of paper? Those are just a few suggestions.
That's great stuff. Thank you very much for that. Martin Pyer of TADS asks, Dane, are you familiar with or have you used the Baldrige Award criteria for education? He's asking, if you are, how effective is that process, and is it proper for the board to take that initiative, to take the initiative?
I would say no, I am not familiar with it, with what you're talking about, but absolutely not to have the board take on that initiative. There can be discussion between the executive committee or the board with the head of school, but the head of school is your expert on the education aspects of the school. It's on the tip of my tongue. The one that comes up over and over again is the International Baccalaureate. Schools lately have been, inclined to want to go in that direction, but it really has to be the point person, has to be the head, and the board would ask the head to look into it, and then the head would come back and give a report on it. But it really has to be left up to the head and his or her staff as to whether there is going to be it could be STEM or STEAM, I'm sure you're familiar with those acronyms, as to whether, or it's going to be curriculum mapping. That is not the purview of the board. It can ask the question and ask the head to look into it, but they should not be leading the charge.
I think we have just one more question from Beijing, and that's Jack Carney out there is asking whether or not he needs a board. And I think what he's doing out in China is he's creating a new small school. And Jack, you're asking, when do you need a board? if you're only going to have 24 children. And I don't know Chinese law, but the answer is you're either required to have a board because of the laws governing a charity, or you're not. I don't know what they are there. In the United States and Canada and in most of the world, charities have to have some kind of board of governors or trustees, whatever the term is used, and you need to check the law. If you decide to set this up as a for-profit, then you just, again, need to double check with the national or provincial law is in your area. You don't need a board if you're going to be an individual proprietor normally. But again, check the law. Be sure what governs you. Having a lot of people saying that it's been very helpful. I think people are ready to call it a day. Dane, thank you so much for all that you've done.
Very welcome.
It was great. Next week, I don't remember exactly what our topic is, but I know I sent out an email with a list. I believe it's Barry Abrams talking about, forget these things and I feel silly. I'll send out an email to everybody with the information about what next week's topic is and the list of everything. So thank you everyone for joining us. This is Tim Selden and Dane Peters. Dane, thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back again and talk more about your wisdom.
I'm going to go out this afternoon and buy a new computer.
Good. Thanks, everybody. This is Tim Selden from the Montessori Foundation, signing off for this week. Bye.